Good morning. It's time for us to begin. Now the bell has rung. What a wonderful day it is to be able to come into a nice, warm, dry building, to be able to worship God and spend some time in His Word this morning. Rainbow, I want us to continue to remember, of course, several that have been on our prayer list and that we want to be mindful of. I know we have several who are battling a lot of seasonal sickness right now. We have a lot who are going through difficult times of grief. There's just a lot of different things that are going on that we need to be very mindful of, and especially as we enter into this time of study together today. John, would you mind leading us in a prayer as we begin? Amen. All right. Have you ever had thoughts that ran through your mind and through your heart that maybe they kind of sounded something like this? You know, sometimes I am my own worst enemy. Sometimes I am my own worst critic. When it comes to anger, there are times I just don't feel like I can contain it. There are times where I just don't feel like I can control myself. I wonder how many times we have either said that or heard someone say it after an outburst of rage, and they said, "I don't really know where that came from," or I just cannot help it. I can't control it. It's almost as if there's something inside of me controlling me, and I don't know what it is. I don't know why I do what I do. A lot of times that is a statement that really needs to be examined by a person. I don't know why I do what I do. I think it's important to begin to unpack that, to begin to understand oneself if we're ever going to be able to cope with our anger in a healthy way. Again, whatever the extremes for anger for you might be, whether it be the outburst of rage on one end of the spectrum or the quiet, withdrawn depressiveness on the other end of the spectrum, whichever extreme that you may fall, oftentimes I need to start to understand myself. Because you see, ignorance is not going to be an answer for us. And when it comes to anger management, truth be told, ignorance is not how we deal with it. I know, again, sometimes we may want to fall into that pattern of saying, I don't know, I don't understand, I can't help it. And that is such a lie. We can, by the grace of God, we can help it. It's just oftentimes, one, we really don't want to, or two, we don't know how to. We haven't taken the time, such as in a study like this, to try and understand ourselves better and thus understand how God wants us to be behaving. Many times, a fundamental problem when it comes to controlling our anger is our self-esteem, our self-worth. The way that you manage your emotions, again, to whatever extreme you may be, the way that you manage those emotions is oftentimes a very loud commentary of your real self, of who you are internally. You see, it's easy for us to put on a mask. It's easy for us to put on an external display. And we can let people see a certain image that we want them to see. But ultimately, truth be told, once everything is said and done, the real us will come out. As the old saying goes, you know, our true colors will be known. After a while, people will know us by our actions. So again, the way you manage those emotions then is a very real reflection of who you are on the inside. When anger is out of control, when anger is in one of those states that, again, you feel as though you just can't cope with it, you just can't deal with it, you feel as though it has more control of you than you do of it, a lot of times that is a definite sign of a very shaky ego. Someone who's not quite in tune or in check with himself. Like we discussed from the very beginning, that when it comes to anger, and when it comes to outbursts, or when it comes to the other extreme of depression, whatever the case may be, a lot of times anger comes about because simply we are trying to stand up for our basic needs. And oftentimes whenever I am trying to take a stand for whatever my basic needs may be, that means that in the moment I feel as though I am in that down position. That I feel as though I am the one being disrespected. I am the one who is being neglected at that particular moment. That's when I feel inferior. So then what anger does is anger oftentimes allows me to rise up to maybe a certain level of equality in my mind with the person that I feel is the one who is disrespecting me. Now, what happens then for a lot of us? Then we push too far. And then all of a sudden we go further than just being on an equal plane with that person whom we felt disrespected by. Now our anger pushes us even higher so that we can take a place of superiority. Because what do we say? I'm not going to let you put me down. I'm going to put you down. Or you think, that hurt me. Wait till I hurt you. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in a very unhealthy, sinful state of anger. And whenever we begin to feel as though we are all too often the one feeling inferior or put down, that unhealthy anger tells us that we are struggling with frustration of feeling inferior. Or as the sign behind me says, many times our fundamental problem with consistently managing our anger is feeling inferior. Now, I don't think there's one of us in this class who has not at some point in time felt inferior to someone. As a matter of fact, I think feeling inferior is a very common thing, a very natural thing, because if nothing else in our spiritual life, we should feel inferior on a daily basis because none of us are perfect. And what I mean by that is none of us can adequately, perfectly reach the standard that God has set for us in this life. We know what Romans 3 verse 23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, I'm going to assume that you would all agree with that statement because if in your mind you think, well, I know everybody else does, but I'm doing okay, then maybe we could talk after class because you have another issue going on there of self-righteousness. All of us sin and fall short of the glory of God. All of us have our shortcomings, our downfalls. Every single one of us, we do. That's why we so desperately need Jesus Christ. That's why we so desperately need the blood that He shed there on the cross at Calvary, so that we can stand before God one day, not by our own actions, but by the grace of God, through the blood of the Lamb, we're able to stand before God justified. Because all of us sin. Every single one of us sin. And even though we know that intellectually, even though we recognize that to be true, we still oftentimes find ourselves saying, but why? Why do I do the things that I know I ought not do? The Apostle Paul struggled with that. Is it any surprise that we do too? Why do I struggle to do the very things that I know I shouldn't be doing? For just a moment, think about your own shortcomings, because I know that if you're like me, there are many, and we don't have time to really unpack all of those shortcomings. But just for a moment, think about those areas where you struggle. Think about those times where you find yourself saying, man, why am I so impatient? When I don't want to be. I want to be more patient. But I just find myself at times just so impatient and watching my watch and watching the time, and I'm just getting in such a hurry, and I'm just so frustrated. Why am I so negative and critical? I want to be positive. I want to be optimistic. I know the people around me want me to be, and I know that I need myself to be. But man, I just always find myself in this cycle of being negative and pessimistic, and I have this doom and gloom outlook like the whole world's caving around me. I know I don't want to be that way. I want to be a cheerful person. I want to be someone who's filled with that joy. I want to be someone who's optimistic and positive, but I'm just not. Why do I treat people, the very people that I say I love, family and friends, why do I treat them so harshly? I want them to treat me in a kind way, and in my heart of hearts, I feel like I want to treat them in a kind way. But more times than not, I'm not kind. I'm not nice. More times than not, man, my tongue, it'll snap and whip them, and I can be so critical, and I can be harsh, and I can be rude, and I can be insensitive, and I am all the things that I would never want them to be towards me. And I don't know why. And the list of things could go on and on and on. Why do I do the very things that I know I don't want to do? Why do I do the very things that I know God doesn't want me to do? Why am I oftentimes a reflection of the very person that I know God does not want me to be? And again, we sit here and go, I don't know. If I knew, I would stop. Would you? I mean, does knowing why you do what you do always bring about stopping? Not always. Because again, here the simple answer, why do we do what we do? It's sin. Not only does our sinfulness create feelings of uneasiness within us, it also creates a tendency within ourselves to compare ourselves to other people. Have you ever done that? Have you ever found yourself with someone maybe at work, or someone maybe that you went to school with, or maybe that you played ball with, and you just always find yourself saying, why can't I be as good as them? Why can't I be as fast? Why can't I be as athletic? Why can't I be as tall? Why can't I be as smart? Well, why can't I be as productive? Why can't I be as rich? Why can't I be as successful? Why can't I be as good as they are? And so we start comparing ourselves to someone else. And even spiritually speaking, it happens far too often. Where even as children of God, we will look around an assembly and we will look to other children of God that we love and admire, and we'll say, man, I wish I had faith like they have faith. I wish I was as passionate about God as they are passionate. I wish I could write the way they write. I wish I could pray the way they pray. I wish I could teach the way they teach. I wish that I was a better Christian like them. I wish that I was as patient as them. I wish I showed love the way they do. I wish I was as merciful and forgiving as they. And so even amongst ourselves, if we're not careful, all of a sudden this spirit of comparing and saying, I wish I could be more like so-and-so. And every time we play that comparison game, we come up short. And every time we play that comparison game, we as individuals, we are on the losing end. And every time we do that, we find ourselves holding on tighter and tighter to these feelings of inferiority, which are ultimately going to bring about and breed more and more frustration and anger in our life. If, and I would underline that, if we are going to be more successful at managing these emotions, then what we have to recognize is that there are some common traps that we all fall to. The first of which is that we give in to inferiority feelings. For many of us, our self-esteem is tied to our most recent performance. For many of us, our self-esteem is tied to how we feel we have been treated by authoritative figures, whether it be a boss or a parent, anyone who we feel is in a place of authority over us. For many of us, we feel feelings of inferiority because we feel as though someone in our life is ignoring us. They're disrespecting us. They're again not treating us the way we feel we deserve, not necessarily the way we need to be treated, but oftentimes it's our assumption of how we feel we deserve to be treated. And whatever the message is, whatever the reason is, the unspoken message is always the same to us as individuals. Blake, you're never going to be good enough. Blake, you're never going to be perfect enough. Blake, you're always going to have these faults. Blake, you're never going to measure up. You're never going to make the grade. You are never going to be as good as you should be. And the more we allow ourselves to preach that very negative message to ourselves, the more we're going to be reminded of our inadequacies. And the more that we're going to be reminded of the reality. You know what, you're right. We're not perfect. But in that moment, too, the temptation is then to become more inclined to anger. I'm sick of trying. I am so tired. You know what? I am never going to be as good as they are. And they're always better than me, and they've always been smarter than me. I don't care anymore. I'm just sick. I'm tired of it all. And that anger just, wells up in us. Because we have fallen into a trap of feeling inferior. For others, we seek a false sense of superiority. You see, most of us, we're not going to be content, and I don't guess that we should be, in just wallowing in our own self-pity. Most of us are not going to be okay with just wallowing in our own inadequacies, saying, well, I'm just not good enough, and I guess that's just the way it is, and I'm just always going to be this way. Most of us look for a way out, right? Most of us, we don't like that feeling, and so we look for an escape. We look for a means by which we feel that we can take control back. That you're no longer making me feel inferior. No, I'm going to do something now to try and make myself feel superior. A lot of times we don't even realize it in the moment. We're not necessarily doing it consciously. It's just what we have trained ourselves to do for many, many years. For an example, when I was growing up, like most kids, man, kids can be mean. And I learned real quick that whenever kids said stuff to me, they were making fun of me, stuff that I didn't like, things that made me feel inferior, I learned real quick the way to fight back was not with my fist, but with my tongue. And I learned real quick that I had this ability to use humor to fire back, to make fun of them more than they make fun of me. And so what then does that do? That then takes me out of my place of feeling inferior, and it helps me to escape to a place of being superior, because now all of a sudden, you're not making fun of me. No, everybody's not laughing at me now. Now we're all laughing at you, and I just took it a little bit further, and I just got a little bit meaner. But some of us never grow out of that, do we? Some of us are always like children. We always feel like we have our back in a corner. We always feel like, well, you know what happens if you kick the dog? That dog's going to bite you. And we think that justifies our behavior. It doesn't justify our behavior. Not at all. Because again, as children of God, there is supposed to be a certain amount of control, self-control. It's the fruit of the Spirit. You should read about it sometime. There's a certain amount of self-control that all of us should be displaying if the Spirit of God is truly within us. I want to encourage you to take your worksheet just for a moment. And let's see. Let's go through this list here, and let's see if you compensate those feelings of inferiority for superiority. I have a hard time listening to someone who is frustrated with me and want to offer a rebuttal. In other words, when someone is annoyed with you and they're telling you, they're saying, listen, I'm annoyed about this, I'm upset about this. You find yourself able to listen and just absorb the criticism, whether it be constructive or not, and just absorbing it for what it is? Or are you sitting there really not even paying too much attention to what their point is because you're ready to fire back? You are just waiting for them to take a breath, waiting for the opportunity that as soon as they hush for a moment, now you're going to put them in their place. Now that you're going to offer your own constructive criticism. Oh, really? You think that I'm bad about that? Well, what about this? When someone speaks ill of me, I respond in kind. Now, don't misread that. It doesn't say that you respond kindly. It means, in other words, when somebody talks bad about you, you talk bad about them. I'm not going to let them get away with saying that about me. I tell you what, now they said that about me. Let me tell you this about them. I can't believe they would say that about me. Why, they know that I know this about them, and away we go. So if someone speaks ill of you, do you respond in like manner? I like to give the impression that I have fewer problems than I really do. Again, we've talked about this with some of the other emotional things that we struggle with. Are you transparent enough to be real, to be genuine? Or do you like to create and maintain this facade as though you have, no real problems? Oh, everything, how are you doing? Oh, everything's fine. You know, that's one of the biggest lies that we as Christians tell. Every given Sunday as we come together to worship God and people are coming and going and we say, hey, how are y'all doing? Oh, we're fine. And we smile and we walk on. And it's just a big lie. Because we're not fine. None of us are. All of us have our problems. All of us have our struggles. All of us are having internal issues at home with our family, or health issues or financial issues. All of us have problems. But we don't want to own up to them. We're afraid to admit it. We try to cover it up. Oh, everything's just fine. Oh, it's not. You know, I had a professor years and years ago who said that particular lie, that there's an acronym there, and I can't remember the F right now, but the INE represented insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And so, frustrated, yeah, there you go. Frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So if you say you're fine, that's what you are. You're frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So I don't know if we want to be that. Maybe today everybody will say, I'm good, instead of saying, I'm fine. I like to the next one says, I fret or worry too much when someone makes a decision that will directly affect me. I'm known for being rigid or inflexible at times. Are you someone that when people talk about you, that they just say, man, you know what? They're not going to budge. It really doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. They're just not going to budge. You know, we might call that being stubborn. Some of you would say, no, I'm just being strong-willed. Well, you're being stubborn. You know, do you have that personality type that people just know that when you're in that certain mood, there's really no point in talking. There is no point in having or trying to have a conversation because you're not going to budge. And so you're just really going to be wasting your time and emotional energy with that person. I can quickly dissect a person's illogic, freely pointing out his or her errors. Again, maybe you're like myself. And maybe you have the ability. I'm not going to say that it is a God-given one because I believe it's a sinful ability. But you have the ability to just rip someone to shreds with your tongue. You have the ability to listen to what they say, and before they can even finish their statement, you can dissect their statement and their thought and their feeling and tell them exactly what's wrong with them and exactly what's wrong with what they just said and why it makes no sense, why it's illogical. Once I've developed an opinion, I don't want to waste time hearing alternate viewpoints. Once I have my opinion, and again, this is opinion here. We're not talking about doctrine, so let's. I mean, I don't like using politics, but politics is a big opinionated area. Once you have your political opinion, are you someone that it doesn't matter if someone with a differing opinion, if they have something they want to share with you, can you at least listen? Can you at least hear it with an open mind, or are you steadfast in your opinion that you believe that everybody on the other side of the fence is wrong and that everything they say is false? When someone does me wrong, I may stew for quite some time, wondering how to get even. Now, I know that may sound kind of morbid to some. You may automatically think of like some kind of horrible physical getting even, but that's not what it's talking about. Do you find yourself at times just reflecting on what somebody has said, what somebody has done, how they've hurt you, and maybe you start thinking about what you could say in retaliation? Maybe you start thinking about what you could say to someone else in retaliation. Maybe you start thinking and hoping that something else will befall them, some other tragedy will happen to them, and then you will say, "Mwahaha, they got theirs." That's right, they got what they deserved. If so, check that. You see, if you find yourself checking 4 or more of those, then you probably worry entirely too much about how other people view you, how they see you, what they think of you. When ultimately asking that question of what will they think, a lot of us have wasted a lot of precious time and emotional energy pondering that question. What will they think? And do you want to know what I've come to the conclusion of? And this is just, conclusion here. None of it matters. The only thing that really matters is what will God think. That's the way our thought process should go. As children of God, our first and foremost concern should be about anything. What's God going to think about me? What is God's opinion of me going to be for saying this, doing this, thinking this? What does God think of me? Because you know what I've learned about mankind? Can't any of y'all send me to heaven or hell? I know there's a lot of people in this world, they like to tell people to go there, right? Can't nobody send somebody else to heaven or hell. Only God can. So ultimately, my chief concern, my first thought process should be, but what about God? Is this okay with Him? Because ultimately, He's the only one that truly matters. I think when we try to establish the feelings of superiority, listen, it does provide temporary relief from the heartache of feeling inferior. Because again, if it didn't, we wouldn't be tempted to do it. If it didn't feel good to lash it back out at somebody, we wouldn't do it. If it didn't feel good to get revenge, we wouldn't do it. We know how good in the moment that it feels to pop off. And then I told them this. That's right. Tell you what, they're going to regret they ever said that to me, because then I said this. Well, yeah, and then they said that, but I said this. And we just get bigger and bigger with it. And we feel like we've done something great because we've said something and we have really put this person in their place. But do you know what happens? That moment, and it's just a moment that you are able to feel a little bit more superior. The next moment, you're back to feeling inferior. And then so you feel like you have to say something again, and that makes you feel superior again for the moment. And then something else is said or done, and you feel inferior again. And it's this back and forth seesaw. Up and down, back and forth, up and down, up and down. All it does is perpetuate anger. All it does is perpetuate that frustration. Nothing is ever really solved. Nothing is ever really fixed. It just builds and builds and builds. And you never can stay at the top the whole time. If you're feeling inferior, watch out. Because at any time, at any moment, you're going to find yourself feeling very inferior once more. So we have to be very aware of those two traps. And I think the only way that we can start to overcome those is, number one, to recognize equality. I would like to think that what I'm about to say is makes perfect sense in all of our minds, but sometimes I wonder. All humans are equal. All humans are equal. Now, in your mind, you may say, well, sure we are. Okay. But do you treat people like that? While you may recognize that all humans are equal, in reality, do you treat people as though you're all equal? For some of us, when there's someone around us that we feel is superior to us, we show them great respect, don't we? As though they're this regal someone who's just walked into a room because they're superior. So we don't really see them as equal. Other times, we talk down to people and we're condescending to them when they come into a room. We say, man, I can't believe they came in here wearing that. because we see them as inferior. So while the idea, the statement of all humans being equal is true, do you grasp it well enough to apply it? Because you see, not until we really begin to understand that all of us are truly equal will we be able to get off of that seesaw of always going up and down and finding ourselves wanting to feel more superior when we ourselves in those moments feel inferior. All of us, while some of us may have talents, we may have abilities that others don't have, that doesn't mean that you're better than me. Just because you have capabilities, you have talents, you have resources, whatever it might be, you may have more than me, but it doesn't make you better than me. But all too often in our world, in our society, that is exactly the way that we have been ingrained. What do we talk about? We talk about climbing the proverbial ladder of success. What are we talking about? Climbing higher and higher while other people are beneath us. And why do we want to get higher? So we can get above the person that's above us. But it's not really a game of superior or inferior. It's not really a game of above or behind. It is a game. The truth is that we are equals. You know, Peter struggled with this. He was a Jew. And during his day, during his time, man, you know, the Jews were God's chosen people. And everyone else were Gentiles. And everyone else were just seen as dogs, man. That they were the leftovers. And the Jews were the chosen of God's. And then those Jews, they did just a funny thing. They didn't really appreciate being God's chosen people. And they kept going back and forth between God, just again like a seesaw of being with Him and being against Him and just doing their own thing to the point that God finally said, you know what? It's going to be about everybody now. And what He did was He made this clear through Peter. Again, this man who is a Jew, this man who has this great heritage. And Peter has this vision where he sees a blanket. On my mind, I always picture like a picnic blanket, you know, being lowered to the ground. And here are all these animals that can now be consumed. And the message there is that it's all okay. Mankind, that is. It's all okay. And of course, you remember how Peter went from that point over to the house of Cornelius. Cornelius was a Gentile. And he preached to Cornelius, and Cornelius obeyed the gospel of Christ and was baptized. And we will say that Cornelius, of course, was the first Gentile to be converted. And look what Peter would say about all this in Acts 10:34. Opening his mouth, Peter said, I most certainly understand now God is not one to show partiality. If we are to have a heart like God, if that is the purpose in being a child of His, is to strive to be like Him, then surely we should have His heart. And if God is not someone who is partial, that is, if God doesn't look upon us and say, well, He's up here and she's down here and vice versa, neither should we be. We should strive to be people who truly see everyone as equals. Now again, I encourage you to take your worksheet there. We have another checklist. And check the things. Don't check the things that you want to be. Be honest and check the things that actually apply to you. I have no right to speak harshly or condescending to anyone. Now, do you really? Don't check that if you don't believe it. Because sometimes we find ourselves in far too many situations where we think, we rationalize in our mind, I had every right to say whatever I just said. So if you're someone who says, I have no right to speak harshly or condescendingly to anyone, check that. Secondly, being different does not mean a person is better or worse than I am. So again, if you're able to look at people and see the differences in people, but not make that equate better or worse, check that. If I must confront someone, I do it with respect. If there's a conversation that has to be had, you can do it in a respectful way. Being in a position of authority doesn't give me greater worth than another person. Hopefully you're not someone who finds yourself with various titles in life, and it makes you feel as though you walk into a room with a certain arrogance. It makes you feel as though people owe you respect because of whatever the letters may be or the titles may be that are behind your name. No human has the capacity to make a truly accurate judgment over another. Do you truly believe that we don't have the authority to judge someone else? If someone chooses to judge me, I'm under no obligation to receive his or her opinion as fact. If someone does want to tell me their thoughts about me, I don't have to accept it as the reality. That, in other words, you can just kind of let that roll off of you. If I can choose, or I can enjoy my uniqueness without assuming it gives me advantages over others. You can recognize your own God-given talents, and you can acknowledge the fact that, you know what, I do see that there are things that I can do other people can't do. Doesn't make me better than anyone. Doesn't make me worse. It just means God's given me an ability. My standing before God is the only judgment that truly matters. Again, going back to our previous point just a few moments ago. Now, the more of those things that you can agree with and that you would check, the easier it is for you to get off of that seesaw, to get off of that inferior-superior seesaw that we go through so often. Now, my last point before the next bell rings is we need to minimize evaluations. We are a culture that is obsessed with evaluating. We evaluate our performance with grades in school, with emotional management. I mean, that's what we're doing in this class. We're evaluating our own emotional management, even with the checklist that we just did. Even our Christian living, we want to evaluate these things. Now, what happens is whenever we feel compelled to grade and to evaluate, then our self-esteem begins to rise or fall based on the evaluation of others. In other words, based on whatever we perceive to be our latest report card. And it doesn't matter how positive the evaluation may be. What is implied by the evaluation is this: well, you did a great job. What's implied? You better keep up. You better continue to do a good job, or you're going to stumble, and then you're not going to be doing good anymore. Then you're going to be doing bad. And then we're going to be forced to tell you how bad you're actually doing. The strong emphasis then that oftentimes comes with evaluations such as these, coupled with the inability to not be perfect, and again, none of us are, but coupled with that lack of ability to be perfect, grading one another just ends up being a waste of time, a waste of emotional energy. As the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 10:12, we're not bold to class or compare ourselves with someone of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding. Avoiding those human evaluations, avoiding those things that can keep us from being so competitive and so aggressive. When we do that, we begin to be able to see people for who they really are. That you, me, we are sinners saved by the grace of God. Nothing more, nothing less. That when we look to someone who's not even in Christ, we see someone who is tragically lost, but had the mindset of, well, but by the grace, there go I. We see them for what they are. No better, no worse. So much of our frustration, so much of our anger is directly tied to our ego. It's directly tied to our self-worth. And it's a lot easier when you're on the outside looking in, but I think probably most all of us have had experiences in life where we have seen someone just explode, or we have seen someone withdraw into a shell, into a depressive state, and either way we walked away going, bless their hearts. They don't love themselves. They don't care enough about themselves. Their own self-worth has been, for whatever the reason, just absolutely diminished. And as long as that's the case, we will continue to struggle with anger. Thank you for your time and attention. We'll pick up next week.